Since Donald Trump took office on January 20th, a litany of executive orders, policy adjustments, and tariff strategies have seen the energy landscape undergo significant changes in the US. Naturally, the president's robust shifts to secure domestic energy and manufacturing prowess have had an impact further afield, with European investors feeling somewhat uneasy about the situation across the pond. To understand the impact of President Trump's policy changes and what the short and long-term implications on the energy and investment landscape could be, I'm joined by Kenneth Irvin, leader of Sidley's Energy and Infrastructure Practice, who shares his points of view on this rapidly evolving landscape. I'm Pamela Largue, and this is the Energy Transitions Podcast. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about a topic that seems to be on everyone's radar, and that is American energy policy or the American energy landscape. And of course, since Trump took office, it seems like such a short time ago, so much has changed. So I'm really pleased you can give us some insight into this. And I think let's just start. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience at Sidley.
Thanks, Pamela, and thank you for having me here today. I agree that a lot has changed. We're approximately 5 weeks into the new Trump administration, Trump 2.0, and clearly there's been a change in direction. Oil and gas and fossil fuel production is definitely the front and center in the new administration. Another thing I think we'll probably talk about today is critical minerals. The news of the agreement with Ukraine, for example, is front and center in everything we're doing in energy transition. I'm one of the co-heads of our energy practice group. I office in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, just a couple blocks from the White House. My remit for our energy practice group is the energy regulatory, trading, and hedging parts of the practice. Our practice area covers all aspects of the supply chain, the value chain for energy, but the folks that I have responsibility for are the ones that ensure compliance with federal and state energy regulatory issues. And a lot of that is at issue in what Mr. Trump is doing in the new administration.
So I think before we get into the nitty-gritties, can you take us through some of the key changes that we've seen since Trump took office? So much has happened. He's done so much. He really hasn't wasted a single moment in office. What are some of the highlights in terms of his policy changes?
That's absolutely correct. Mr. Trump and his administration have been on a tear since day one, January 20th, through yesterday, and every day is news about something happening. On day one, there were a series of executive orders entered, over 40 executive orders just on the first day. 8 of those addressed energy issues. And those were, among other things, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. That was something Mr. Trump campaigned on and said he'd do it day one, and in fact did it day one. Another executive order was declaring a national energy emergency and citing that we, in his view, have inadequate infrastructure in the United States and energy prices are so high, all of which threatens national security and gives cause to declare an emergency. When the president declares an emergency that unlocks presidential power and the ability to short circuit things, that's potentially going to be used as a basis to expedite permitting, short circuit process for getting new facilities permitted. It also might enable using what we call the Defense Production Act, which allows the federal government to kind of hop to the front of the line in getting materials and supplies. Other executive orders were unleashing American energy, unleashing Alaska's extraordinary potential. Mr. Trump has got a focus on Alaska that's kind of interesting and keen. And of course, one of the more notable orders was his pausing leases of offshore wind. And everyone will recall the campaign rhetoric about how he feels about wind generation. His administration has taken steps to stop further leasing of offshore facilities for new wind projects. Existing wind projects that have their leases will carry forward, but no new wind projects are going to happen, at least presently under the Trump administration. So those are just but a handful of the things that have changed. There's the creation of a so-called National Energy Dominance Council that's chaired by Secretary Burgum from the Department of Interior and co-chaired with Chris Wright, Secretary for our Department of Energy, and reflects a very deliberative, concerted effort by the administration to look for where there's red tape, regulatory impairments to production of energy. And by that, he means oil and gas and or critical minerals.
Ken, if I'm honest, my brain is abuzz with questions. There's so much to delve into and unpack. I mean, you've kind of rattled off some of the top sort of policies that have now taken effect. But to be honest with you, if I think about the Inflation Reduction Act, what that aimed to achieve and to a large degree actually achieved in terms of driving renewables and storage and research and development in the green energy space, I mean, what are we looking at now? Because I feel like we've put the car in reverse gear, or have we? What are your thoughts? Where to now?
That's an interesting and a very on-point question for a number of reasons. Let me start first with demand for electricity. I know you've touched on AI and data center demand and basically electrification and the increase in demand for electricity because of that. We see that here in the United States. It's, the forward curve is a hockey stick, as they say, and it's a pretty sharp escalated hockey stick. To meet all of that demand for electricity, it's going to take an all of the above approach. Mr. Trump definitely favors dispatchable power generation like gas-fired power plants, and we will see support for gas-fired power plants, new ones entering the grid, old ones being prolonged in their service period. But there are supply chain issues with developing new gas-fired generation. The availability of natural gas and pipelines to bring it may be expedited by the Trump administration, but the ability to acquire the turbines, the transformers, the other materials to build the power plant, steel, aluminum, and that sort, are all impacted by supply chain issues as well as tariffs. So according to some, right now, you can't deliver a new gas-fired power plant into commercial service before 2030, 2035. So we have this demand for electricity right now. Waiting until 2035 to install new gas-fired generation isn't going to make it. So that means solar, wind, battery, the inverter-based technologies are going to have to fill that void. They're going to have to answer the call. And in fact, we've had a lot of new additions, 25 gigs of inverter-based technology just last year. Retirements of old thermal units continues. So I think there is hope for, or I would expect to see renewable resources of electric generation to continue to participate in our market, continue to be part of the dispatch stack.
I feel like that is a hopeful way to end that comment. That is hopeful indeed, if renewables can continue to be a key part of America's energy market. But I think what I'd like to understand is these tariffs specifically. You mentioned how President Trump has really come in, and obviously he wants to drive domestic production, manufacturing, homegrown energy, as it were. But tariffs, for example, like the aluminium and steel tariff, could that not have almost the opposite impact on, for example, the oil and gas industry that he is trying to spur?
How the tariffs intersect with his other objectives is, let's say, a cloudy question. It's not entirely clear. They could be working at cross purposes. Undoubtedly, the president believes there's a harmonization and a logic to it all. I think one key difference is the approach to the energy market. I think Secretary Wright described it as Mr. Biden was investing in particular technology and supporting the industrial planning that led us to drive into inverter-based generation, batteries, electric vehicles, whereas Mr. Trump doesn't like picking technology and likes instead investing in innovation. And in some ways, folks saw in the first Trump administration the price of crude oil and natural gas come down, and they attribute that to innovation. We definitely are producing more oil and gas than ever, and you have to give innovation a lot of credit for that. And so, if the new administration is going to stop investing in particular technologies and kind of reorientate investment into innovation, including how to make stuff here in the United States itself, then I think that could be a good thing, can be a hopeful thing. We definitely import a lot of steel and aluminum. Infrastructure requires a lot of steel and aluminum, and so how the cost of tariff works and impacts project costs, that's clearly an issue that needs to be sorted out, and a potential impact that could be at cross purposes to the goal.
Ken, tell me, do you think that some of Trump's policies are perhaps a little bit isolationist in a way? That he's almost, I wouldn't say cutting off the rest of the world, but I mean, through his America First policy objectives, is he perhaps putting the rest of the world on guard, as it were? And could that potentially scare off investors?
There's definitely an American First policy, and America First means as much as possible to have manufacturing, production, all of what we need that makes America run day by day be here within our own jurisdiction, and has impacts about how we rely on overseas markets for the necessary inputs to energy production, for example, or production of any other consumer goods. He is very focused on the United States. For example, he's nominated a gentleman to head up the U.S. Geological Survey, Ned Mamula. He calls himself a hard rock geek, right? He's very much about critical minerals. He's very much about getting the country focused on having enough resources for all the stuff we want to do. And that includes copper, uranium, titanium, and all those kinds of resources. He believes, Mr. Mamula, the United States has all that it needs to do that. And so I assume his tenure at USGS will be focused on trying to press the administration, to press industry to develop what we have here in the US. So that's an example of where our reach to overseas markets for critical minerals might dissipate in favor of new production here in the United States. At the same time, we just struck a deal with Ukraine for some of their mineral production, and we're talking with others about that too. So finding the right balance with friendshoring versus domestic production, that's definitely something that bothers Mr. Trump. He thinks about a lot, and that will reorientate how you think about investment. If you're an overseas investor and you're interested in the US market for energy infrastructure and the like, I would think that it would be best, easiest to underwrite if you were looking at as much domestic US content as possible. Transactions that would rely on world trade don't find as much favor in the current administration. So you have to change your orientation that way.
Indeed, it's been interesting to watch some of the European organizations and how they have potentially tried to prepare for this new administration, such as Orsted, for example. I think they took a bit more of a bearish approach, perhaps, to some of their offshore wind projects in the US. So it will be interesting, specifically in the offshore wind space, to see how this develops.
Offshore wind and so much of what we're doing on a grand scale for energy, the next phase here is technologically challenging for a host of reasons. On our West Coast, offshore wind is going to be floating wind platforms and floating transformer platforms. I know that that's been done in places in Europe, but the Pacific is a very challenging ocean, and floating wind generation there is going to be a challenge. At the same time, those resources potentially have super high capacity factors and can really add a lot of electricity. The other aspects, even for thermal units, where we look at trying to use hydrogen or carbon sequestration or other techniques that kind of better optimize the production of electricity to emissions and efficiency, still, that's a lot of technological challenge that we're working on. It's not like easy gimme putts in a golf game. It's actually kind of long, complicated drives. So that's a factor. And I think Generally, infrastructure companies, energy companies, they're all trying to adapt and adjust to the fact that a large piece of what lies ahead is technologically challenging, capital intensive, has a long time between when you first break ground and when you get to commercial and service. So, patient capital, a willingness to see a long ways over the horizon, that's a certain kind of investor. I think there's lots of opportunity for that, but it definitely is a different kind of investor than somebody who's thinking, oh, we'll do this and get paid back in 2 years.
Indeed. And if you consider the energy transition at large, it really is a journey. And I think that patient capital is what's really needed, whether it's in the US or around the globe, to see some of these technologies mature and really come to fruition in a way that's meaningful. Ken, I would like to pivot slightly. You touched on critical minerals. You mentioned Ukraine. There seems to be a topic that's in a state of flux. Today, there was an update as well of Volodymyr Zelenskyy saying that, perhaps there is room for a deal. But of course, that could be regarding Russia, could be security. And to be honest with you, security, energy security, the lines are very blurred of late. What is the latest? And what is Trump really hoping to gain from Ukraine?
Okay, it's not a fair question to ask me what is Trump really thinking. Okay,
Do your best, Ken. I understand.
you know, the question about Ukraine and updates, I think that's a moment by moment. So, as they say in the news, stay tuned. This is a developing story. Mr. Trump indicated that Zelenskyy is going to be here in Washington to sign an agreement on, I think he said, the 28th. So, if that happens, that would be great. For Ukraine, we've had a lot of agreements about their situation over the years, and it would be nice that they finally find a way to do something that has the permanence and the long-term peace and stability that they seek. Taking advantage of their mineral wealth seems like a natural way to do it. I don't mean take advantage as in being unfair with them, but using that as an opportunity for Ukraine to get the agreements, the support, the security assurances that they need seems like a good use of those resources for the country. So the devil's in the details for that, and it'll be interesting to see how it happens. Um, for the United States participation, obviously that will depend on private companies, industry going in there and developing and then monetizing those resources. So we'll have to see how that works. I think, so much of electrification depends on an array of minerals that we haven't really paid attention to. Uh, Graphite, for example, is included in every battery. We talk about lithium ion batteries, and that's the cathode of the battery. And people are innovating about the technology for the cathode. But right now, the anode of the battery is all graphite, and they're all graphite. So we need those minerals too, right? So um, the ability to find relationships like this where there's a mutually beneficial ability to do trade, I think is something that will work for the Trump administration. He just likes to deal with it on a bilateral basis and make sure that there's a balance in how American interests are protected versus the other party's interests.
Ken, what I'm hearing from you is that Trump is doing things obviously quite differently compared to the previous administration, but it's not a case of all hope is lost. There will still be opportunities, investment. There will still be a renewable energy element to the energy mix that will be pushing forward. So it's not all bad news. However, it does seem that perhaps the sentiment across the pond in Europe is a little bit more negative. Have you heard what the opinions of investors are? Are you getting a feeling for what's happening in Europe in response to Trump's policies?
What's clear is there's uncertainty and unease. Since January 20th, and actually probably since November, we've had an endless stream of questions from clients like, what does this mean? What's going to happen? And as we joked, it's really hard to make bankable predictions about Mr. Trump. Unlike the way other presidents maybe approach things, in this administration, one person makes all the decisions. That one person sits behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. So you really have to understand what Mr. Trump is thinking and wanting to do And that's not always easy to project. And that gives uncertainty, and uncertainty is horrible for underwriting investment. People like to make projections and show a 10-year curve for revenue and the ability to get repaid. And where there's too much uncertainty, that messes with the ability to do that. I think there continues to be a lot of support for carbon-free electricity. We have utilities that are committed to it. We have state mandates. We have corporate sustainability goals. Yes, you can still say sustainability. So all of that is driving demand for electricity. And then we just have outright demand for electricity. And as I said earlier, the inverter-based technologies can be delivered a lot faster right now and meet the immediate demand that maybe the thermal units cannot, the spinning mass cannot. So I am hopeful. I just think it's the seas, the winds might be churning a little more than the prior approach, and we're definitely headed in a different direction. We're focused more on oil and gas and resource development. They're opening up federal lands, federal offshores to more mineral development, more oil and gas development in a way that the Biden administration wasn't. There's definitely a lot of drama to what's going on, and it's notable that Mr. Trump, for example, rescinded 46 executive orders by his predecessors. Of these executive orders that he rescinded, there are orders by Biden, Obama, Carter. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped Clinton. Biden, Obama, Clinton, Carter, and Johnson. So you'll note that all of those are Democrats. But Mr. Trump believes in the way our Constitution should be interpreted and believes in the way the power of the executive should be administered. And he's taking that and following through on his intentions there. One other point here, and I'll turn it back over to you. But one of the things I'll also note with all that's happening here is so many of my friends who are not lawyers are all become constitutional scholars as we look at the power of the president and the so-called theory of unitary executive that's being implemented here. That's really part of it here, and that'll come before our Supreme Court. And it's fascinating to me how a lot of folks are tuned into that and watching, and somewhat apprehensively, somewhat encouragingly, but a lot of folks are tuned in. So it's something different in this administration.
Well, I can tell you, I think it goes without saying that people from around the world have been watching this space with a very keen eye. Whether you have a law degree, whether you're even working in energy, it really is, you mentioned drama. And I think it has brought a bit of drama to what was a relatively, I don't want to say unilateral, but I feel like the globe was moving in a direction. We were all part of the Paris Agreement and moving towards those goals, whereas now America's kind of forging a new path, perhaps. But the fact is, the rest of the world is still moving towards Paris Agreement goals. And I think perhaps President Trump will still find himself having to work within that context and perhaps within those boundaries, those global boundaries, as the world moves towards achieving Paris Agreement goals. So definitely a space to watch.
Absolutely. And for oil and gas, especially, Mr. Trump's goals depend on overseas markets. Here in the United States, we're going to have increased demand for gas for making electricity and for continued development of space heating. But really, the demand for further gas production, oil production, are overseas markets. That's why he talked with India. That's why he's talking with Japan, and obviously Europe, and the LNG exports that we're doing. Unpausing the issuance of export authorizations for LNG was another aspect of his first day orders. And Secretary Wright issued the first non-free trade agreement authorization for Commonwealth LNG. And we expect to see more of those. How the overseas markets react or what requirements they have in order for U.S. goods to be accepted into those markets is a factor. The Europeans have requirements about the source of natural gas and tracking methane. That's something to be worked out between the Trump administration and the European countries, the EU, And I think there's attention being paid to that right now. There's a hope that LNG will continue to flow freely and in the requisite volumes. But, your observation that our overseas markets could have requirements that need to be addressed by the U.S. export is spot on.
You mentioned earlier in our discussion that it's a cloudy question, and I feel perhaps that is one of our key takeaways because that sums it up. It's a cloudy question, and I believe that the world, Europe more specifically, is trying to understand how they can navigate through this rather cloudy landscape at the moment. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before we conclude?
Thanks for delving into this. And yes, I would welcome a chance to talk for days and days with you about this. And each day is something new. I am optimistic. The innovation that's happening in the electricity markets, the energy markets, and related to that, the data markets is fascinating. It's amazing the pace. So we have to be smart about things and we have to have capital. So I do think the United States offers a lot of opportunity for investors, domestic and foreign. I do think that you'll find the sanctity of contract remains observed. So number one predicate of an investment is still here. There's uncertainties, there's tumultuous seas and pretty strong winds, but I think if you aim in the right direction, the wind is at your back. And I think you can figure out and chart a path that will work for this administration and what comes next. At times here in the US, 4 years seems like a long time. I joked at the start that we were 5 weeks into something that is 48 months long normally, but 4 years also flies by very, very quickly. So if you're going to look to the United States for investment, think about how to shape it so you can endure changes in administrations and the zigzag that we seem to have come here from Trump 1.0 to Biden to Trump 2.0. We may have another course correction as we look ahead as well. But the market is still very much attractive from my point of view, and there are good opportunities.
Well, Ken, those are wise words indeed. Playing the long game and keeping an eye out on the future, not just what's happening right now. Well, there is a lot happening, and it's been really great to get your insights into some of those happenings. So, Ken, thank you very much for joining us and for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I look forward to keeping in touch.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Energy Transitions Podcast, brought to you by Enlit and Friends. That's a wrap from me, Pamela Largue, and our producer, Kamo Motse. We hope you can join us next time. Visit enlit.world or subscribe for more episodes.